Good morning. I'm Abby Mood, Marketing Director at Velocity Advisory Group, and I'm here with Amanda Nichols from Velocity Advisory Group and Christian Nielson from TMA Performance, formerly DecisionWise, if that name sounds a little more familiar. And I am so excited. We're all excited, but I'm particularly excited for our webinar today. So, Under Pressure, Leading Through Disruption, Overload, and Change. So, Amanda and Christian are going to dive into some of the internal and external factors that are affecting your employees and the employee experience that they're having. So to give you a brief bio of our host, so you know who's talking, Amanda is an advisor in Velocity Advisory Group's Data and Analytics Department and is also known as our resident data wizard. She supports the team's efforts in identifying efficient solutions to intricate business problems through survey response-based data analysis. She does a whole lot more than that, but that's her area of expertise. Christian is the Executive Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at TMA Performance, where he leads initiatives that empower organizations to elevate employee experience and drive meaningful change. With over 15 years of experience in org development, he brings deep expertise in employee engagement, leadership development, and change management. So on that note, I will hand it over. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I need to do some housekeeping things. If you want to drop in the chat, say hi, tell us where you're from. If you have any questions, you can also drop them in the chat. We will answer them at the end. And if you are here for the SHRM credit, that will come out in the email when we send out the recording after. So yeah, go ahead, Christian. You can take it from here.
Thanks, Abby. Excited to have this conversation, and we welcome some engagement in that chat. Questions, comments, we'd love to hear from everybody. I thought it might be interesting to kind of start our conversation by looking at some employee experience trends over the last 5.5-ish years here. This comes from our experience on the TMA Performance / DecisionWise side, where we keep track of what our clients are saying, what the feedback themes that bubble up in the survey work that we do. We've presented this in various formats in recent months, so I won't go into great detail, but just to kind of level set, it's interesting to go back to 2020 and look at what was happening. Now, some of you may remember 2020 was a pretty interesting year in terms of external events. It's when we really entered COVID in a big way. And we saw a major move to remote work, and organizations having to think on their feet very quickly. How do we do this work safely, and can we accommodate remote employees? Many for the first time ever. We also saw some political and social unrest that showed up in a big way in our survey. DEI bumped up in priority. It's always part of the conversation, but it showed up as a very dominant theme for the first time in 2020 across all industries that we were measuring. And then we saw some related things around communication, productivity, and collaboration as we reorganized our work. Can we get this done? How do we collaborate when we're not all co-located and things like that? If we skip ahead, as we scan over to 2025, we see workload, mental health. In the last couple of years, and starting in 2023, we saw compensation start to come to the top of mind. As you look at 2025, it's dominating the employee mindset. If you think through the price of eggs over that time, our dollars aren't going as far as they used to, and employees are feeling that. That's adding to some stress, as well as we see workload in that number 2 spot in 2025 so far, where employees are feeling the stress of, maybe we haven't replaced all of the employees that we've lost, as we've through economic reasons, or else through efficiencies and uncertainty around AI. A lot of employees are feeling the stress of doing more with fewer resources. And of course, culture, diversity, equity, inclusion / belonging, also very still top of mind, as well as some things around processes and communication. But I think just those top 3 areas really kind of help set the stage for the conversation we're having. People are feeling the pressure, internal, external stresses from disruption, change, and that's really what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Christian. I love the story that 2025 piece is telling, that piece where people are requesting, I don't feel like I'm paid as much. I'd love to get an increase in salary. I have so much on my plate. And then you're getting requests about culture where it's like, I don't have the collaboration I once had. I don't feel as valued, financially. I don't feel as valued because of the workload on my plate. And from a culture perspective, I don't have that kind of backbone or the structure that I needed culturally to support me. So the feeling valued element and the way that people are fitting in today is a change that has happened over the past few years. And with change, I mean, so much has happened since 2020, as you can see with the fluctuation of all these trends. So that's a great segue into the whole conversation we're having today.
Yeah, agreed. I think on the next slide, an interesting item to keep track of. The level of stress in my job is manageable. Now we could do a number of different cuts on this item. In our TMA performance database, we have a pool of about 60 million employee survey responses, and we pulled this particular item and decided to cut it by leadership level because I think it tells an interesting story. Stress is felt across the organization, no matter what your role is, but it can be experienced in very different ways. This is a percent favorable response. In other words, do they agree with this statement? The level of stress in my job is manageable. And here we see managers, only 61% of managers felt like they can agree with that statement versus 78% of executives. We can speculate on some of the reasons why, in terms of, executives maybe not their first rodeo they've gone through, and so they're maybe a little more accustomed to some disruption, some ambiguity, uncertainty, those types of things. But also, we all know that those of us who've worn that manager hat know that can be a tough role. Especially as a frontline manager, we do a lot to control and create the climate on our team. And sometimes with limited information, we don't have the same flow of informational resources as you go up in the chain of command. But interesting to see this. And for me, this aligns with what I see in reality, what I felt from my own experience when I've worn that manager hat. Amanda, any thoughts on kind of this disparity or the pattern we're seeing here?
Yeah, I love this slide because I've been seeing it a lot coming up in survey results. And I think it's so interesting to see. I mean, we know that we're hearing a lot from individual contributors who make up the majority of our workforce that they're feeling stressed, overwhelmed. We hear that. But then when I see the manager level dip down so much, I start to really try to understand where's the breakdown in delegation that's happening or a level of communication, and why is there a disconnect with that level, but then all of a sudden VPs it's a little bit higher again? I think that a lot of changes that have happened for organization over the past few years, VPs are helping making some decisions, executives are in the room making those decisions. A lot of the frontline managers are taking the burden of answering the questions that their teams have. And so they have that stress on them. They're also being pressured to think more strategically, and they have the same level of workload or more because of that. So they're kind of in this interesting space. And at the same time, they're being told, oh, well, just delegate to your team. They're there for you. They're here. Not everybody has the training to do that. We're not all born to be managers. I think that's very rare when that happens. So to see managers maybe being able to step up more and delegate more efficiently, I think can really help with this area. But you can definitely dive in a lot deeper with this. I mean, it's just such an interesting slide. Definitely.
Yeah, if we think about it from just purely that change piece, the executives get to often function at that operational, or excuse me, that strategic level. Here's a change that's important. This is the direction we need and want to go. VPs get that, but also a little bit of the tactical operational side. But the managers are the ones that have to actually employ this and get in the tactical weeds of this, manage those emotions with the frontline employees, and fill in a lot of communication gaps that maybe aren't part of the formal change management program or tactical plan.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot to handle in one position for sure. I can understand why this would be much lower.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Oh, I think this one's mine as well. I love
Yeah.
this conversation. Maybe because it's therapeutic for me to discuss openly. But the concept of VUCA, we operate in a VUCA world. Now, VUCA is this term that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and it originated in the late '80s. From the U.S. military as a way to describe the post-Cold War uncertainty, this unpredictable world that kind of emerged post-Cold War. Now, business has kind of adopted this term because we live in a time of rapid uncertainty and change, and volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. This VUCA concept is very helpful to describe some of what we're seeing. I like to look at this from the standpoint of employee experience. A lot of the work I do and we do on our side is around employee experience. Now, as we think through employee experience, it's nice when we can plan things. If we think through the employee life cycle, we can plan what we want a candidate to experience as they explore hiring or a position with our organization. We can plan onboarding, promotions. We can plan what an exit experience should look like, or anniversaries, these moments in the employee life cycle that are predictable. But volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity enters our world in many ways. We'll, I'm sure, talk about a number of those ways, but we can't necessarily plan on it, or we can't schedule it. And these moments are interesting because they reveal the underlying values of the organization. If this isn't scripted, if it's not a carefully designed, crafted experience, then our values are going to be on full display. A manager is going to have to know how to show up, and often the culture informs that. This is how we treat people when the unexpected happens, and so it's something really interesting to consider, and also while we can't schedule these, we can plan. We know these things are happening right now. We know more uncertain things are going to be dropped on us in the coming weeks and months. And how do we respond? How do we prepare our managers or leaders at any level and employees to just prepare for and experience VUCA? I think is something that is an important conversation in any organization.
Yeah, I love this slide. I think that, seeing uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, thinking about those things, and knowing that the only thing that we really can control in times of uncertainty is the way that we respond and behave. And so, if that's all we can do, to your point, Christian, it's trying to plan as much as possible, but understanding that adaptability is one of those behaviors that we might just have to take on in these moments. Now, the tricky part, going back to the trends, is since 2020 and before, adaptability has been the primary behavior that we've all had to show. And so it can be a bit exhausting to have that every single day showing up. And so it's almost this time period where we're seeing people kind of just let go of it a bit and say, I just don't know if I have that energy, which is where that workload comes in, these stressors that we're going to talk about. So it's all just one big puzzle, but this is a great slide to pull up.
Well, and it's interesting in terms of I as you were speaking, I was reminded I had many clients ask me some version of this question: how do we hire for grit, or how do we hire for resilience? And it's tough to predict coming in. I used to joke and say, hire kids that grew up on farms or something like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
in reality, just like most of us aren't born managers, most of us have to learn some resilience and flexibility, and just be kind of prepared or primed to know, hey, things aren't going to be perfect, and we're in this together, and we're going to adapt, and we've got your best interest in mind, and there's this shared experience that can help strengthen employees through these times of VUCA. But they do come. They're not fun, but there's also this concept of post-traumatic growth. These can really give us an opportunity to stand, to rise up, to become more than we are as individuals, as teams, but as organizations as well. And so it's not always easy to reframe these experiences, opportunities in the moment, but they really are. There's chances to disrupt and become better if we navigate these carefully.
Absolutely. And I think when you're hiring, it's looking for that grit, but in order to have that as well and to nurture that, you need to behave that way, showcase that as a behavior, whether you're leadership, manager, a colleague, whoever it might be. So to set that expectation across the organization is not easy in and of itself, let alone try to hire somebody who shows that grit as well as they can. So I think that the VUCA model absolutely makes sense here.
Good comment in there. Burnout happening because of these things right now. Yeah, one way I've heard this described is somewhere between boredom and burnout is employee engagement, and these things can definitely lead to burnout, where we're feeling so many things internally, inside the organization, outside the organization, that really wear on people, and if we're not careful, can definitely lead to that unhealthy burnout.
100%. Thinking of some of those factors, at least, that can lead towards that level of burnout, a nice segue into our next section. I think we want to pose into the chat, if you all want to respond, just maybe some ideas of external stressors as well as internal stressors that you might be experiencing. So external, thinking about life events, the economy, anything happening in the world right now, and then internal, more what's happening in your role, your organization, your team. We have a few examples to share, but if you want to share any in the chat before we go in, I think we'll find a lot of similarities.
Yeah, this is the cathartic part, where we get to see that we're all feeling some of the same challenges. But yeah, please, if you've got anything top of mind, enter it into the chat. Yeah, John. And Michelle. The economy, consumer confidence. Yep. Economic and political impacts on family and friends. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, just those relationships alone. And then if you read any HBR article posted over the summer, all of them are basically about relationships internally, externally, whatever it might be. So it's clearly top of mind for everybody right now. Layoffs. Yeah. Definitely, John.
A lot of us have people close to us out of work right now, going through those pains as things feel increasingly expensive.
Absolutely. Some of those external factors that we saw in employee comments and internal stressors as well. One of the things being, and let me make sure. There's a lot of pressure to perform for people. We talked about this one when it comes to workload, expectations, thinking about managers and mental health, that level of burnout. And I see, Michelle, you just put in that work-life balance, AI taking our jobs. That's definitely part of it. Feeling overwhelmed by the volume of work, the lack of clarity around priorities. It's hard to know what's most important when everything feels urgent. We also saw some comments about constantly being told to do more with less, which is such a difficult thing to do, especially when people, John, you mentioned layoffs. Other people are talking about AI taking jobs. We are always requested to do more with less resources, and we see resources, we see processes come up so much in a lot of these survey results and comments that it's not surprising to see this, and I think we're all feeling it right now.
Yeah, I love the mention of change. Employees, all of us, myself included, when a change occurs organizationally, a lot of times our natural instinct is, oh, this is going to be worse for me, or what we're getting is not going to be as good as what we're giving up, or this puts me in some heightened state of risk. And change is increasingly constant. We're always doing internal reorgs. We're doing implementing new technology systems that change process, and it's tough. It has all that takes a toll. A lot of times when I'm doing employee engagement work, it's fascinating to look at engagement levels prior to going into a large organizational change, because I look at it, do we have enough in the bank account here, the engagement account, to go through something like this? Or do we have enough excitement and energy in the organization and alignment to carry us through this? Because we're going to take a hit in terms of the experience people are going to have. It's going to take a toll on employee engagement, at least temporarily. And so it's an interesting thing to consider as we look at those changes.
Absolutely. And even
go ahead, Amanda.
I was going to say, just even to that point, I think a lot of people, it's easy to forget the relationship between employees and customers in a lot of way, or products and services. And so when you talk about taking that hit, it's the engagement levels, but also in turn, how does that influence your customer base? Because you're always going to see an impact there. And so it's that constant trade-off that we have to evaluate.
Yeah. Just as we're seeing these comments, I know we're going to look at some more comments on another slide. Two questions we often ask on our side of the fence as we're working with organizations. At the organization, at the team level, at the individual level, just to ask two questions. What experience are we creating, and is it the right experience? And it's a lot of the reasons we tap employee feedback from surveys and other work that we do is really to try to understand what experience are we creating? Is it going to lead to the outcomes that we're comfortable with? Amanda, to your point, outcomes for the customer or stakeholder, outcomes for operational outcomes, financial and otherwise, but also for the employee. What experience are we creating for them? Is it going to lead to higher engagement? Is it going to lead to retention? Are we going to lose people either to burnout or for them actually leaving the organization? So a lot of this is, are we creating an experience that's going to invite people to bring more of their best self, or are we inviting burnout and disengagement?
I love that piece. It goes a lot back to that culture aspect and the understanding of how we collaborate with one another and support each other in teams. And one of the things that we'll be touching on is a little bit of the blame game that's happening out there, where a lot of teams seem to say, well, if I'm under pressure to perform, I'm not going to take the blame if anything goes wrong. And so you start to have this kind of disgruntled sort of workforce where people are not able to collaborate as efficiently, and it's not as safe of an environment as it once was. So when you think, oh well, people stay because of their manager, they stay because of the relationships they have, we might have gone through layoffs, but at least they have some people still on their team to talk to. That's not the case necessarily anymore, because now everybody's thinking of themselves in a lot of ways, as they might need to in times of stress and change. And so it's not surprising to see that, but it's certainly not a pillar to stand on as much as it maybe once was, because of everything happening and changing in organizations.
Yeah, definitely.
I know we got a few comments as well about those external stressors. I just want to read a couple here and then we can look at some from the chat. It's hard to stay engaged, to your point, Christian, with everything that feels heavy and unresolved right now. The key with this first comment is, wishing that leadership acknowledged this more openly, which I think is a really tough thing for leadership to do, because it's taking a specific point of view or stance in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's just a level of empathy that a lot of people are looking for. And that empathetic leadership is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, on top of, oh yes, you have to be resilient, you have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, you have to plan through everything that can possibly happen with all this uncertainty. And on top of that, you need to make sure that everybody's getting paid and everything's going and running smoothly. So to have some empathy is a tough thing for leadership, but employees are certainly requesting it more than ever that we've seen.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great guidance. I know certainly when I've led teams, sometimes there are things that I felt like, oh, I'm not going to bring that up because I can't take action on it. But sometimes the very act of just acknowledging, hey, I know there's these stressful factors that are impacting you, and just acknowledging that, and not owning the fact that there's limited steps we can take to take any meaningful action, but just helping to empathize and call it out. Employees are often wondering, hey, why aren't we addressing this thing that I'm feeling?
Absolutely. Seeing other things brought up, uncertainty in the market is making everyone anxious. That's certainly clear. Budget cuts, layoffs. I mean, the amount of organizations I've worked with this year who have gone through layoffs is significant. And to see the changes from their previous, engagement results or whatever it might be to this year, it's tough to see that, because it typically drops significantly. However, it's understood that it's going to decrease. And that's exactly what you were talking about, Christian, with that trade-off and that kind of, you're going to give up that sort of engagement level or that engagement impact in a lot of ways in order to make the right decisions for your organization.
Right. It's nice if engagement could just climb every year indefinitely, but that's not the reality of what we see. These big events, especially big internal events. I saw M&A activity mentioned in the chat. Um, we definitely see engagement drop after those big reorganizations, and then climb. That's one of the measures of success. Yeah, we're going to take a hit. Can we shorten the time to recovery? Can we build some enthusiasm there? So, and then of course with these external factors, my goodness, there's so many comments we could have pulled around some very real feelings that happen outside the organization, but find their way into impacting, things like, attendance, productivity, engagement, retention. All these things aren't limited to the things that happen within our office walls. The spillover effect is something we'll address here in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of, comments about the decisions around funding and projects not being able to get funded, whether that's government funding or elsewhere. And my husband's in academia, and he's certainly feeling that, where it's just the unknown of what's going on. So going back to VUCA, of course, it's how can we plan as much as possible? Also, the empathetic leadership. How do we acknowledge this? And how can we make sure we're addressing it in a timely manner?
Yeah. I think a lot of leadership teams are in a kind of a holding pattern because there's so much uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen with this political decision or this economic reality, and so they're waiting. And that waiting is cascaded and can add stress too. I mean, not that there's anything else they can do while they're waiting for more information to make the best decisions, but it does have an impact on employees, where budgets are frozen until we get some clarity, and people just feel this on edge, what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And going back to thinking about those frontline managers, leadership doesn't have the answers. Frontline managers certainly do not in that instance as well, yet they are bearing the brunt of most of those questions at that time that this is all happening. And so they're also taking on a heavy workload. It's again not surprising to see that the scores have lowered for them in particular, but this just all makes sense in that whole grand scheme of things. Yeah, I see a lot of people talking about self-care, well-being. I know there were some comments about friction, the workplace feels less inclusive. I think that's a key point that some organizations address, which is the well-being and the wellness of employees, and really establishing certain policies or behaviors to benefit that. I know a lot of companies will do, the summer Fridays or a shorter Friday or no meeting days to help that. So that's certainly come up more, but it's that same way of addressing what is possible and acknowledging how people feel. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of comments here about that. Bridget just said, writing a book, girl, lay down. I find that suggesting my people take a break, take a walk, grab a coffee, take a nap. Absolutely. Just taking a step away from the laptop, taking a step away from what's going on, putting on some headphones and walking around outside, feeling some grass. That's definitely gonna help a little bit at least.
And it's amazing, I'm going back in my mind to the slide that shows the manager feeling the pressure the most. The tough thing is a lot of times that's the exact person we need to role model this behavior, and they're feeling the stress, so they're just mired. There's not enough hours in the day, and for them to be present enough and be willing to say, I'm going to stop and take a break for my own sake, but also to demonstrate to the team that these wellness moments are important, and this is a priority. It's strategic for us to slow down occasionally and take a moment and invest in our well-being. It goes a long ways. I love the conversation, and I also would read that book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep diving into some of the real world examples. I wanted to jump into the blame game. This is something I've seen so often with clients that I'm working with, the cross-departmental collaboration in particular, that lack of job security that I was mentioning. It comes up a lot in comments, especially after a round of layoffs, and you're going to see that come up. But I remember reading a few comments where it was HR is responding and they're saying, if IT would just fix this one problem and finance would submit that report on time and then accounting would communicate more effectively, then everything would be great. But then, of course, finance is also commenting and saying, well, if HR could work on this one file for me and if IT could, it just is going around and around and around. And it's that constant blame game that's coming up a lot in the comments that is not necessarily suggesting that you have an unhealthy culture. It's not that. It's more so it's the side effect of the layoffs. It's the side effect of all this change that's been happening and people just feeling burnt out and they have to protect themselves in a lot of ways. So that's not necessarily something to hyper fixate on. It's more the other factors that are influencing that. That's something to definitely take a look at.
It's such a great point. I can't think of a survey. Well, I probably could if we scoured our data, but offhand, I can't think of a survey I've run in the last several years where cross-functional collaboration wasn't one of the lowest 5 scoring items. And when we feel stress or when employees feel at risk, it just plummets because we often tend to just kind of huddle with our team, and we do have a high risk of an us versus them mentality, even with folks that sit 10 feet away from us. They're part of a different budget, different department, have a different manager, whatever it is. There's sense of an other, and trust goes down. And so a lot of the work that we can do is trying to expand that sense of team. Our team isn't just the 5 people that share the same manager or share the same title. Our team is our team and the team next to us, or ideally it's we as an organization, including our customers, that's our team. And we see deeper levels of engagement, deeper sense of meaning and purpose when we can get there. But the natural instinct when we feel threatened often is it's us versus them, and we huddle. We can see it very clearly in survey data when engagement is low and trust is low. This us versus them, this blame game that you're describing. Our team's great, but boy, that other team is the worst. Unfortunately, too often we see that.
And that's a great point because it brings up what I also see in comments when people are like, well, this could be fixed, if my manager would talk to other managers of different teams more often. And so we're going right back to that behavior expectation of managers. And they're feeling the most burnt out right now based on the data, or at least that they can't handle their current workload. And so we're finding this almost single point of failure that needs to be adjusted and supported in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I know a lot of us. In training, I often ask the question, what gets you promoted from an individual contributor to a manager for the first time? And invariably it's I was great at my job. Or if they're a rock star individual contributor, suddenly they're managing people. And along those lines, we forget to tell them, oh, by the way, your job is to support their growth and development. And by the way, your job is also to invite employee engagement by creating this type of employee experience. And also your job is to speak positively about your peers on other teams and to help connect them back to the larger organization. Those things often, to your point, Amanda, some people naturally show up with that skill set, but usually we're learning it a little bit too late, or through painful experience, that there's a better way as a manager. And so I've seen companies do a great job at building manager training and those type of things, but it's really building a culture that reinforces this is how we're all in this together. This is how we talk to each other, how we talk about other teams and so forth.
Absolutely. And at Velocity, when we do that level of manager training, I mean, the pillar of it is, okay, what are the organization's behaviors? I look up their mission, their vision, and their values. And if they're requesting of the managers in the room, hey, let's learn more about that adaptability and resilience. Hey, unless this is explicitly stated as something that's a value or a behavior that you'd like to see, I don't know where that miscommunication was, but it's not always clear to managers that that's something that they should be doing on top of the infinite other things that they need to be doing. So you're absolutely right. It's that kind of pillar of that behavior that's established.
We see it in 360 feedback. Too often, it's very unfortunate that the first time they're even receiving an expectation that, hey, these are the behaviors you expect of leaders is when they're being measured in the 360 feedback. Now, it's better there than never, but it's better if we're just measuring an expectation that's already been communicated. Some of these things that are captured in 360 feedback, but very interesting.
Absolutely. I'll keep moving forward. The immense pressure, we've talked about this, managers not feeling equipped to answer questions, tension increasing between senior leadership and team members. And I say that because, Christian, maybe you've seen this as well. I've seen where if you're asking a question around, trust in manager. Yes, I trust my manager. We have a great relationship. You talk about the favorability score, 90% plus. Okay, trust in leadership. Oh, no. No, I don't trust them. I don't trust them to make the right decisions. I don't trust That's down closer to 60, maybe 50% favorability. And so that disconnect, a lot of leadership, it's tough to see that because sometimes it feels like a personal attack on who we are, but that's absolutely not the case. It's more so disconnecting communication. You might have some level of a platooning effect from managers where they aren't as well equipped to answer questions. So they're saying, hey, leadership doesn't know, I don't know, so nobody knows what's going on, we should be freaking out, and that's not what we want to hear at all. So I've definitely seen this disconnect. Christian, I don't know if you've seen this as well in some of your clients.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of flight attendants. When I'm on an airplane, I don't. If there's turbulence, I look at the flight attendant, and if they're calm, I calm right down. But boy, the few
Yep.
times I've seen their eyes get wide, then I'm about to call home and say, I love you, honey. I don't know how this is gonna. It's an analogy that I think applies to managers and the way they handle things. And it's a lot of pressure to put on managers. We see why their scores they're getting pressure from all angles, let alone setting the tone for the team. We actually identify three ways of looking at a manager. We just based on what we see in employee data, we identify three kind of archetypes around where their agenda is. And we see me first managers, team first managers, and org first managers. Now, me first managers are pretty easy to spot. And the antibodies kick them out pretty quick because nobody wants to work for a manager that's going to throw everybody under the bus just for their own good. And those are pretty obvious. But team first managers are dangerous because that seems virtuous. Oh, they're putting the needs of the team before everything else. But what we see is they're the ones that'll say, hey, look, I don't like it either, but those jokers upstairs say we got to do it and we're in it together. And the team it builds some loyalty to them within their immediate team, but it's short-sighted because it limits employee engagement, it limits the experience of their employees. What we see in the data is the more a manager can positively connect their team members into the larger purpose of the organization, including building some confidence in senior leaders, the better it is for engagement, the better it is for their employee experience, the better it is for retention. All the metrics that matter to us and matter to the organization are improved when we see that kind of mindset. Now, it's a delicate balance because it can also sound like I'm asking managers to be propaganda machines. No, this is where art meets science. Find an authentic way to advocate for the team. I'm not saying don't say things that you don't believe in, but find an authentic way to speak positively about the organization to help them see that they're part of your team, see that they're part of the larger mission, purpose, vision. Connect them to the customer wherever possible. That creates meaning and alignment as well. But a lot of these things, the tension between frontline employees and senior leadership can really be helped or hurt by the way the managers are speaking about the organization.
100%. And I think based on that, it goes back to basic economic principles or just having a mutually beneficial relationship here where the managers will be happy and are happy to speak positively on the organization when the organization is also providing something beneficial back to them that promotes their employee engagement. And so it goes both ways, and thinking about how we can focus again on that manager level, provide them the training that they need, say, we support you. And then they're happy to talk about the benefits and the growth opportunities and everything that is going well in the organization. It's little steps from each side that needs to happen to kind of break that tension and build that bond back.
Yeah, definitely.
Last one I have here is that human-centric approach. So I've seen in a lot of comments, employees are just asking, basically. They're just saying, I just want to be heard. I just want leadership to show they care. I want to feel that empathy from them. I need more internal direction because leadership is trying to focus a lot on the external factors as well. All these things that we were talking about is hitting them and hitting their organization. And so they're focused on this, and that internal direction maybe lightens a bit. And employers are saying, no, we need more attention now than ever. We need that focus, we need that direction, and also include that empathy. And it's a tough ask, but I've seen it come up quite often with clients.
Yeah, you know what I'm reminded of with this one is when we study our data and some of the metrics that we really care about, you know, one, of course, employee engagement. We're always trying to build engagement or invite more employee engagement, higher levels of engagement. But an item that is one of the items that is the best predictor of employee engagement is very related, and it's I feel like I belong here. A very simple question. And if we do the statistics behind or run the drivers and the correlates behind the scenes, the things that we see moving the needle on feeling like I belong here, or I feel like I belong here if I feel like I'm heard.
We don't have too much left, but I do like this next slide. And hopefully no more freezing. You never know. One of the things that I know we wanted to discuss was the spillover effect that Christian has talked about before. That's that economic factors, things that don't stay outside of the office that influence how we feel day to day. It's the same thing as when we have factors in our lives that happen, and it influences how we show up at work and whether we're in a more positive mood, maybe a more solemn mood. And so you're often to see that as a contributor, just how we feel day to day. Job insecurity in a volatile world, we've talked about this, where especially when people are feeling that stress of the fear of job loss, and so we start to get that blame game and the finger pointing because people are feeling stressed, not only at work because they feel like the workload is not manageable, not only because of the blame game that's happening where they're pointing fingers at one another, but also just in the way that they feel less secure about the role that they're in. And so they're asking for growth opportunities. They're saying, what's next? Especially when you have a high performer, what can I do? How can I influence the work? They're trying to really be there for the organization, but it's definitely tougher when you have this stress that's happening and you're feeling it all over, especially from that spillover effect as well. Financial stress, higher cost of living, dealing with inflation, not knowing if the Fed's going to cut rates next month or not. Nearly half of burnout cases tie back to money concerns, so it's not a surprise to see that burnout's increasing so significantly. And I know we talk about burnout, we've been talking about it for a long time. It's something that has not gone away and likely won't with the direction that the economy is heading, with the direction that people are feeling. However, there are things that we can do to somewhat soften it in a lot of ways that we've already talked about previously, thinking about behaviors from leadership, from managers, supporting managers the best we can, communicating, setting expectations. Generational impact. Oh, I think we might have Christian back here. Let's see. I think he might join soon. If the internet's working, who knows now? I do think that the generational impact, though, I'm always sensitive to this one in the way of when we want to bring it up, because sometimes when we talk about generations, it can dip a little bit into stereotypes of certain generations. So we want to be very mindful of that. But we are seeing that for younger workers, Gen Z, millennials, they're reporting higher levels of burnout from factors like money, sleep issues, compared to older generations. And I know that this, let alone everything else that's going on, is also causing somewhat of a cultural divide. Hey, Christian. Glad to
Hello.
have you back. Oh no, he's popping in and out. I'll continue with this though. So the sleep issues and just money issues that are happening, we've seen this with the external factors. It's not a surprise to have this, but it's certainly impacting the culture that we have. The way that we can relate with younger people on our teams or older generations, that alone, we're thinking back to that empathy, the empathy that we have for one another, the empathy that we have for other generations. That's what we're seeing here. Are you sticking around, Christian? Hopefully.
Let's see. That was the best way I could illustrate VUCA for everybody.
There we go.
My
I
internet
love
went
that.
down, so apologies. I'm back.
No, that's fine. I think it froze for me. I think everybody was having issues, but I'm just going over some of these contributors. I know you had a lot of thoughts around this. Do you want to share anything before I jump into the next one?
Yeah. Yeah, just this idea of seeing people, our employees, we want to be professional. We want to, make sure that the rules at work are different than the rules at home. We acknowledge that, but also there's room to acknowledge that people are whole human beings, and that this isn't an episode of Severance. People don't leave all of the stress and weight of their personal lives, as well as the larger social context outside that comes in. Acknowledging it. I mean, I'm sure you've already addressed all of these things, but I think just recognizing these are whole people that are coming here. Or yes, we're professional, but as a manager or as a leader at any level, I need to acknowledge that there's some complexities that sometimes we do need to address. Sometimes we need to have more of an empathetic tone or approach as we interact with folks and as we make decisions.
Absolutely. The last one that I didn't touch on yet was the cost to business. Yeah, Christian, I think you might have a perspective here if you want to share first.
Yeah, so I think sometimes a leader may, at the top of the organization, may want to just discount this to, oh, we just need to toughen up. This is actually very strategic information. It's not just the human side, the trust falls and things that sometimes we get discounted as HR. This is very strategic to the organization. There's real costs associated when employees show up and either quiet quit or very distracted. Safety incidents, go up as we have issues like this. We see 8 times more in absence and loss of productivity. I often think through like the healthcare industry. Think about going in for a surgery. Do you want the staff to be distracted by external factors and stress? Do you want them disengaged? What kind of brain surgeon would you like? An engaged brain surgeon? It's kind of an extreme example, but just recognize there are real costs associated with this, real risks, liabilities that come into play when our workforce is not at its best because of internal and external factor stress and disruption that they're feeling.
Absolutely. One of the things that we do when we go over survey results and, we throw an hour's worth of information at you that seems overwhelming and too much at one time is we talk about, okay, well, how do we narrow this down to the top things that we can touch on or work on as an organization? And so we did that here a little bit on how to support your team from some of the things we talked about today, but you can certainly go more specific or tailored to your organization. At the high level, that empathetic leadership, it's embracing that more socially centered approach, while understanding the external factors. So, Ro, I saw in the comments that you mentioned, how do we talk about generations without dipping into those stereotypes? It's that idea of understanding what trends and feedback we're hearing from different generations, but not being in a conversation and saying, oh, well, Gen Z doesn't know how to write emails. So I don't know how we can train them on that. Or we need to train millennials on how to be better at technology because it's just not working right now. It's more using it in a more striking conversation that you don't want to do, and instead having empathy for the ways that we're seeing those trends and just bringing that into the behaviors that you have, not necessarily calling it out in full force in the moment.
Yeah, I like that. And something along those same lines, leaning into what they do want and not speaking about the limitations of a generational. This generation has different perceptions around growth and development. It means something different to them at this stage in their career. And also generationally, we see some different expectations. Let's lean into that versus okay, boomer, that's going to alienate someone if we're
Right.
going with some of those negative or the limiting aspects of generational expectations or capabilities. I prefer to lean into what do they want, what do they value versus where we see some limits.
Exactly. And that next point on the cross-departmental opportunities, we've talked about it here. It's rebuilding that trust. Thinking about opportunities, whether it's a sort of challenge of sorts that you might have an innovation game I've seen some companies do, or just ways to get more of that cross-departmental collaboration. Having the manager expectation that there is that positive culture for that cross-departmental collaboration. Managers are working with each other, department heads are talking and communicating, having meetings when they can, but of course, understanding that managers are also under that stress, and how do we support them in other ways as well?
It's really helping teams see each other as human beings, and some exposure, some shared events, even leaders leading meetings around, hey, how do other teams depend on us, or what can we do to support this other team, and just setting that tone and even having that conversation demonstrates that as a priority. And lunch and learns, whatever you can do to cross-pollinate. And I always think of how vicious YouTube comments are. And they're vicious because they're anonymous. We don't see the other, there's no accountability, no responsibility, and it's easy to dehumanize people when we're in anonymity. And so what can we do to help the team see each other as real colleagues, real human beings, and understand their needs and priorities?
And with that viciousness that can come up, or at least very candid language when there's anonymity, we certainly see that in some employee feedback. I'm sure you've had your fair share of reading through some comments and seeing some harsher words used, but the acknowledging the employee feedback, to Christian's point, what you said earlier on, if you can't take action on it, then at least acknowledge that it exists, because employees will appreciate that. But listening to the feedback, pulsing regularly. Christian, you mentioned 360s. If we're thinking about supporting our managers and they want to grow, well, maybe having them conduct a 360 and they understand where they can further develop. And you can also see where maybe they're struggling, especially in that workload space.
Yeah, it's what experience am I creating? Is it the right one? That's a 360 is a perfect instrument for that, for a leader to take a step back and say, okay, what trajectory am I on? How are other people experiencing me? Am I okay with that? Is it going to lead to outcomes I'm very comfortable with? Or am I damaging relationships in ways that I was unaware of? It's this concept of let's get blind spots out in the open so leaders can be more strategic. It can be uncomfortable, but it can be a really powerful experience.
Yeah. Living in uncomfortability is how we grow,
That's
ultimately. Right. So. Well, that's what we had here. I know I'm getting the warning from Abby. I can tell we have about 5 minutes left for Q&A.
I heard my name, so here I am. Yeah. We had a question from Michelle. When high performers consistently take on more without added support or capacity, burnout obviously becomes a big risk. Their departure can stall momentum, disrupt team dynamics, and erode institutional knowledge. Ideas around managing these situations. So how do you manage high performer burnout?
I've got some thoughts, and then Amanda, I'd love to hear from you as well. One, I'm always curious, how aware are we of this? It's happening at most organizations. People are great at getting things done, so we give them more to do. And often it goes unnoticed until they get burned out and disengage, or they quit. And so do we have mechanisms in place to know, well, who are our high performers and what are we doing around workload? Manager one-on-ones are amazing across so many different dimensions. The data bears it out time and time again. And so that's a nice entry point around leveraging manager one-on-ones to recognize, are we distributing the work unequally? And when people are taking on more than their fair share, is this a temporary situation? Are we acknowledging it? Are we calling it out and celebrating people stepping up? And are we taking steps so it's not indefinite, so that they're not just going to be carrying this for the rest of their time here? Those are some initial thoughts I have. Amanda, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts.
That was spot on. I think to your point about the making sure everybody has that same workload, it goes back to that delegation. Managers are feeling that they're stressed and they don't have a manageable workload as much as others. So how are they delegating, and are they doing it in an equitable way? On top of what you've said, something I'll say is, when you're acknowledging or noticing high performers in your data specifically, it's always interesting if your organization's large enough, is when you're looking at the employee data and your surveys, to take the performance data so you know who's a high performer, and you're able to see where are they scoring very high, where are they scoring low, and what's correlated to their retention metrics or their engagement metrics. Is it growth and development opportunities? Because there's your answer. How can we give them more opportunities in different ways and provide training that will be helpful to them? Is it communication? Well, they're looking for some answers, and we need to acknowledge that we either have them or we don't, and give them what we can. It's just things like that. It could be processes, and that's something we can look into. So I would say leverage your data first and foremost before making any assumptions. But to Christian's point, those manager one-on-ones are just as powerful. So definitely use those as well.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple minutes left and one more question from John. How can we influence C-suite leaders to invest more in employee engagement, even though quarter-over-quarter results and business growth is good and solid?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Christian.
No,
you
please.
can start.
After you. I went first last time.
Okay, I'm just gonna hop in with the whole piece that I talk about a lot when I'm speaking with professionals in HR, whoever it might be. They're trying to convince leadership, hey, invest in employees, invest in their experience, and listen to them through the survey. And we talk about, well, I'm gonna say it again, data. Take the customer data that you might have, take any product data that you might have, services, and correlate that to your employee experience information. Because leadership will see that your employee data highly influences your customer data. And then boom, you can control employees a little bit more in terms of their engagement, way more than you could with customers. And so if it's growth and development that can positively influence employees, then in turn that can influence customers, and you'll see higher revenue, you'll see higher statistics or CSAT scores or anything like that. So that relationship I've always leveraged significantly in those conversations.
I love that. A conversation I've had recently is with executives whose focus is pulled so many different directions right now. Is there's so many things changing technologically, politically, socially, but there's one thing that's not changing. We can't afford to let potential lie dormant in our employee population. We can reach a competitive advantage by inviting stronger engagement from our employees. There is power and potential in each one of them. And if we create conditions that invites them to employ more of their discretionary effort, more of their ideas, more of their energy, we're going to achieve great things.
Awesome. Well, that's time. So I'm sure we could keep going and talk about this for much longer, but we promised we'd keep it to an hour. So here we are. Thank you again to everyone who joined us. If you, as I said at the beginning, if you joined us a little bit later, the code for your SHRM credit will come out in the replay email that you'll get within the next half hour. But yeah, thanks for joining. Christian and Amanda, thanks for sharing your expertise. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby.